Time is just gone 8:46 a.m. and we continue this morning taking a look at what is taking place in Iran, looking at the ongoing protests, and we are now joined by research fellow at AFRISID, Aisha Keji, who has recently returned from Tehran, where she was leading a group tour. Aisha, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for having me on the show.
Yes, Aisha, having just recently returned from Tehran, and the latest we hear about Iran handing out more death sentences. The anti government protests continue. We've heard
Mhm.
of close on to 350 protesters that have been killed already, death sentences still to come, close on to 16,000 arrested. Uh, how serious or how critical is the situation in Tehran?
Well, Inayat, I want to say firstly that while there is no doubt that the Iranian government is very authoritarian and dictatorial, and there is also no doubt that protests are ongoing in Iran. However, what I saw on the ground is very different from what has been portrayed in the international media. For example, you have just quoted a number of 350 people dead. Al Jazeera actually did a fact check just this week because, for example, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau tweeted that 15,000 people had died. And that number was also quoted by other so-called reputable sources such as Newsweek. When Al Jazeera did the fact check, what they were able to ascertain is that the official figures are 5 people being sentenced to death, and that about 43 people from the state security services, that is the police and military, have been confirmed dead. And according to human rights groups, about 100 of the protesters, including students, are also confirmed dead at this point. So these figures of 15,000 and even 350 are inflated figures. I'll give you an example. I was in my hotel room in Tehran. Yes, the internet, there's a big crackdown on, so you can't access any social media, most websites on Google, etc. But you can occasionally get email through, usually in the middle of the night. However, at one hotel, particularly the one in Tehran, I had access to international news channels. And I was watching BBC, and what I was watching was literally said to be around the corner from my hotel the previous day. I had been in that area the previous day and had seen nothing of the sort, the kind of crowds that were shown in supposed social media posts saying that they were at Vali Asr Square at the metro station in central Tehran. I had literally been there for much of the afternoon the previous day and had not seen anything of the sort. However, that is not to say the protests aren't happening. That is not to say the state isn't cracking down. What I do want to emphasize, though, is that the international media, for reasons, very biased reasons of its own, its desire to portray Iran as the global evil, has really extrapolated what is happening in Iran and blown it out of proportion. So again, I'm not saying the issues are not true. I'm not saying that women, particularly, and young people, particularly, are not protesting. However, we've got to contextualize this. People, again, in the West are making a huge sensationalized issue of the fact that these protests are around the hijab. Yes, they began after the killing of Mahsa Zina Amini almost 3 months ago now, because she was taken in by the so-called morality police in Tehran and died in custody of the police. She was obviously tortured, and she did not die of a heart attack, as the state claims. So that was a murder by the state. And as a result, many women came out in their thousands, men as well, mainly young people, protesting against the death, protesting against the obligatory wearing of hijab. And yes, many women in defiance took off the hijab. But we need to contextualize this also in terms of the history of Iran. For example, in 1978 and 1979, before the revolution from the Shah regime to the Khomeini regime to the Ayatollah regime, many women who would not normally wear chadors came out and wore chadors in protest against the Shah regime. In the same way, many women now are actually removing their hijab as a statement of solidarity, in much the same way as some of those women or the mothers and grandmothers of the current protesters wore the chador then, even though that was not their day-to-day apparel. In the same way, many women now who do wear hijab of some sort are actually removing it. So it should not be sensationalized through this oriental lens of the West. I spoke to many people there, especially young people, male and female, and across the age gap. And everybody agrees that things need to change. But really, the hijab issue is an issue, but it's also largely a metaphor for larger issues such as the state of the economy in Iran, the high rate of unemployment, and general repression and subjugation of voice by the state.
Well, Aisha, in fact, I'm quite glad that you clarified the issue, and it is clear that I have no doubt that there are these huge discrepancies in terms of the way the global media, the mainstream media reports on issues, and Iran is just one example. We've seen many in the past as well, where
Mhm.
whether it was Afghanistan, whether what has taken place in Iraq, and everywhere else, right across the entire world. So I'm not surprised. I am not shocked at the discrepancies that you've now highlighted. Just looking at Iranian society, and you mentioned that you've had an opportunity to speak to people. What is the situation on the ground apart from the protests? Is life as normal?
Life is currently carrying on as normal, but if you speak to people, I mean, I actually, after doing two group tours back to back, leading them, I then went off on my own for a few days. I took public buses, a long distance bus from one city to another, a flight from another city, and everywhere I went, I started speaking to people. I was doing my own little research survey, you could say. And basically, people are unhappy with this current government. They want it to change. They are hoping that the current rift at the highest levels of the theologic bodies, the ayatollahs in Iran, will actually result in a way forward that is more open, not only with regard to the dressing of women and the kinds of work that women do, etc., but also with regard to general freedoms, freedom of the press, freedom of the media, academic and artistic freedom, etc., and also just the ability to actually criticize the state, the ability to actually participate in a more democratic form of government. But primarily, again, every single person I've spoken to says that these protests are very much about the economy. That is not to say that the government is not killing people and shooting live ammunition at people. That is certainly happening. There is certainly a heavy police presence in Tehran and in some of the other cities, but in the capital particularly, very heavy police presence and streets blocked off from time to time when the police believe a protest is about to happen. However, I took the metro. I don't speak Farsi. I don't read Farsi. I took the metro on my own and I came back by metro in the middle of the night, literally on a Friday evening. I was perfectly safe on the train, walking the streets. Everybody is friendly. People really appreciate that tourists are coming to Iran. It's a wonderful country with a huge, you know, wealth of history, architecture, culture, poetry, literature, music, food, art forms such as ceramics, etc. And it's really a place I would encourage people to visit, despite how the global media paints it. Foreigners are very safe in Iran, and locals are relatively safe in Iran if they are not directly involved in the protests. However, I think that the protests are going to continue to gather momentum because literally everybody I spoke to is unhappy with the current regime.
Well, Aisha, Jazakallah khairan for that and for unpacking what you have and obviously sharing what you have after your recent trip into Iran. We wish you all the best. I just wish I could have engaged a lot more because I'm sure there's a lot more you can share, but time is of the essence, unfortunately. Assalamu
Always.
alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam, jazakallah khair.
Aisha KG with us this morning, and we're going to go for a quick break. We'll come back. We'll be joined by Etiquity Secure.